And so sort of squarely thinking about what it means for that group of people. And Yutika, you mentioned this again in the introduction, that it's not just about infrastructure, it's ultimately about people. And so for us, that is the specific community that we've been focused on for at least the last couple of years since we sort of carved out India as a specific area of focus. But within that, I think what has changed or what has come into sharper focus in the last few months has been the fact that, COVID has had a clearly disproportionate impact on different groups and different communities. Right, and so in particular, migrants, again, something that Jarnail mentioned, migrants have sort of come squarely into focus for us and have become a much bigger part of our strategy in the past few months than they were earlier.
This entire pandemic has made certain things very, very evident. Our system is broken. The extent of vulnerability is much higher than what we acknowledge. I was, for a small period, I was there in the previous session, and I heard Amita saying that, the data is totally out of sync of the reality. Of course. And that's the main reason that we are not able to design our welfare schemes and other opportunities that we could have provided to our people today. Take an instant of the BOCW, the Builder and Other Construction Welfare Fund. It's a great opportunity. Many people could have benefited through the schemes. It would have provided a lot of support to the workers, but the workers have to be registered with the board. So when Delhi government last, I think it was in April, when they announced compensation for all construction sector workers, it was hardly 50,000 people who were entitled for this because they were the only valid registered workers. While in total, there are 2 crore workers in Delhi NCR. So technically from that standpoint, yes, we definitely need to see through that we work on our social protection schemes. One illness can take the family into the below poverty line. So that's where we are all kind of getting into. We need to address issues both levels. One, the individual level, and the other one is the systemic level. So when we say the rights and entitlements, the social security, these are all individual level issues. Yes, as CSOs and as funding organization, this is something very, very important, and we all need to kind of address it to the best of it.
So how do we rethink about these systems in a way that is also conducive to the marginalized populations, at the same time is also good for the environment? So that's the kind of trilogy that we are trying to solve right now, wherein on one vertex of that trilogy is climate mitigation or climate action, if I may call. On the other is social equity, so that it's just, it's based on social justice principles. And on the other hand, it's the economic growth, because the country as a whole is trying to revive the economy. So we can't compromise on any of those issues. And I think COVID gives us that opportunity to tackle all of those at once. So I'll just stop there by saying that, we're looking at systems level approach and making sure that whatever we do to make sure that the systems are climate friendly, we are also making sure that they are people friendly, and especially the marginalized and vulnerable groups.
Going forward, we'll definitely see people and the organization asking for welfare measures. There's going to be great increase in the number of requests that are going to come. The way we see, there was so much happening at rural areas, right? The 73rd Amendment has been implemented so very well, whatever it has the capacities of. The 74th Amendment couldn't go to the level where it envisaged to. So I feel the impetus would be on implementation of 74th Amendment, and municipalities and local urban bodies will definitely be questioned and pulled by the communities for development, planning, and local governance.
Can we talk a little bit about how is it that organizations that probably have low, like we talk about low capacity of government. I genuinely believe even our civil society organizations, we have very low capacity. Speaking of like an organization myself, like I know how many hats each one of us wears, and y'all have all been there. So how do you see, like at this point, how do you see the diversification happen? Or where do you see opportunities, or do you lie low, but this is where your community needs you the most?
What should my business plan be, and how can I sharpen it? I think is a very important thing. So of course, thinking about funding sources and how do you diversify them is an important one. But before you even get to that step, I think just saying, what should my business plan be? How should I sort of repurpose it given the crisis? What is the best way of serving the community that I am serving? And in some cases, that might actually require a bit of a pivot in model. So, for example, we are seeing some organizations that used to focus on education, saying, just given the fact that there's a limit to the amount of time that people in slum communities, for example, might have access to smartphones or whatever. It's not possible to do a full pivot to delivering education just through technology. So instead, can we think of a pivot which is about delivering healthcare education to actually look at sort of ways of keeping the community safe from the pandemic? So that's one example. But and of course, each organization will have to find their own version of it. But I think thinking through that pivot to make yourself more relevant to what is going on right now, I think is crucial. Because otherwise, you're absolutely right that funding is scarce. There's no question about that. And so how do you think about making the ask for those scarce funding rupees or dollars as compelling as possible? I think is a very important element.
So I feel that this is a time, as Bharat and both Bharti have said, to pivot. Marketing has to be used in a possible positive way. And before even doing that, I feel that civil society needs to come together to scope out what the future could look like. No one knows what it will look like for sure. But the uncertainty is very, very, is generating a lot of anxiety. And that's what we are hearing from our grantees. We've done 2 levels of outreach with our grantees till now in the last 6 months. And we've seen a transition wherein some of them have figured out a way to come out of this crisis as an opportunity. They've treated it as an opportunity, double down on research, double down on desk research, double down on digital outreach. So they're pushing so much content online. They're organizing webinars. There's fatigue in the market, but there's no other way as well. So they have gotten a lot of, I would say footfall or eyeballs on social media to double down on this opportunity, so to say. And they've, in the process, they have also doubled their outreach and impact.
How do you see us kind of reaching the communities that we intend to serve as them being real partners, like not just through me or through you or through the organization we're working with, but kind of being able to have them in this conversation with us? How do you see that going towards the future? How do you see the world rebuilding or building over the next, say, 5 years or just in a longer term?
I would just emphasize on empathy, that we need to put ourselves in their shoes, and by just being with them and trying to understand. I mean, this whole migrant crisis became or was deemed as a crisis because we felt it as middle class or the upper middle class, because we really lived that crisis ourselves. Otherwise, it's a yearly crisis for those people who are into circular migration. So the bigger question is, why do they have to migrate at the first place to cities and come all the way to the cities and then go back twice a year? So I think that's a bigger question from a crisis point of view, but it's just because it's reached us. That's why, we are deeming it as a crisis. But the larger point that I would want to make is empathy, that we need to empathize. At the same time, while vaccine will come and we will tide over this, we'll also have ways to test whether a person is COVID positive or not in a very quick way. But I think this calls for a systemic intervention wherein we need to make sure that we design or redesign our systems in a way which are conducive to people in the marginalized groups.
Technically, I hope that the new normal would be somewhere where we are able to build that arc to take this person's life from informality to somewhat formality. And the way I see the implementation of integrated development is not at all easy. It requires great deal of planning, great deal of capital. And probably top-down project approach is not the way forward. I feel bottoms-up approach would be helping us to solve the problems in a time-bound manner. So the fundamentals of the urban development and integration of residents into the city system is the way forward that I see as a closure remark.
Keeping that big picture in mind and just being true to your purpose, I think is really sort of important to keep reminding yourself of. And I think that's probably the best way. And to Jarnail's point, I think empathy absolutely is crucial there. To just keep your target audience, if you will, sort of front and center all the time, and keep reminding yourself that that's the individual on whose behalf you're working. And frankly, I think that if we don't solve our urban problems at scale, it's just sort of staggering to think of the disaster we'll be headed for, right? I mean, if you think of being at 30% urban now and being 50% a couple of decades from now, that's a huge number of people we are talking about. And if we don't find scalable ways of making their lives better, it's probably a huge disaster that we're in for. So I think that your work has never been more important or urgent than right now. And so sort of bear that in mind as you go about your work, I guess.